Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlight Series. Today we focus on benchmark CG 4.3, describe examples of the United States actions and reactions in international conflicts. In Part 1, we focus on specific examples of the reasons for U.S. involvement in international conflicts. In Benchmark Clarification 1, we identify specific examples of and the reasons for U.S. involvement in international conflicts. What are these examples and what are the reasons for U.S. involvement? Let's give ourselves some background information. Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution gives to Congress the power to declare war, while Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution gives to the President the power to serve as Commander-in-Chief. Congress has used its power to declare war 5 times in United States history, while the United States has participated in several what we often call undeclared wars since the last time that the U.S. declared war, which was in 1941 when the United States entered World War II. World War II had already been in place for a couple of years since 1939, but the U.S. entered World War II in 1941. But since that time, there have been many instances that we call wars, but there was never a formal declaration of war from Congress. Now we're going to look at examples of U.S. involvement in international conflicts, focusing on declared wars. Notice of the listing of the 5 declared wars that the U.S. Civil War is not included. The U.S. Civil War was not a declared war because a country cannot declare war against itself. Remember that the sole power to declare war belongs with the United States Congress. And so as a consequence, even though we call the Civil War a civil war, it was not a declared war. Let's first look at the War of 1812, which took place between 1812 and 1814. Britain had interfered with United States trade, and Britain had also been taking men into the military by forced recruitment. And as a consequence, the U.S. Congress declared war on Britain. The Mexican-American War lasted from 1846 to 1848. The issue involving the Mexican-American War was whether Texas was a U.S. territory. If Texas was a U.S. territory, then it could be admitted to the United States as a territory or as a state. And the possibility that Texas might be admitted to the United States angered the Mexican government. And consequently, these particular actions led to the Mexican-American War. Then we look at the Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War did not last a long time, as you can see from the dates presented. The U.S. declared war against Spain because Spain was blamed for sinking a United States ship, the USS Maine, in the Havana harbor. Havana is part of Cuba, and so the Spanish-American War was relating to U.S. relationship with Spain and how Spain, in the United States view, had sunk the USS Maine. World War I was fought from 1914 to 1918. The United States joined World War I. They declared war on Germany to join World War I in 1917. And the United States declared war on Germany after the German Navy attacked British submarines and ships carrying U.S. citizens. Interestingly, World War I was a war that President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress to declare war on Germany, and he was successful. But in terms of getting out of World War I, President Wilson negotiated the Treaty of Versailles, which would have created the League of Nations. And the League of Nations functioned as an international organization protecting individual members of the League of Nations. We often look at the League of Nations as sort of the first attempt at what would later become the United Nations, even though it was two different organizations. Interestingly, even though President Wilson was instrumental in asking Congress to declare war on Germany, and there was thus agreement between Congress and the president, when President Wilson negotiated the Treaty of Versailles, and Article 2 requires that the Senate ratify treaties, the Senate rejected President Wilson's request to ratify that treaty. And so even though it was the responsibility of the United States through President Wilson to negotiate the treaty that would create the League of Nations, the United States never joined the League of Nations because the United States Senate refused to ratify the Treaty of Versailles. And then we have World War II. World War II began in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. But the United States stayed out of World War II until Japan bombed a Navy base in Hawaii Territory in 1941 on December 7th. Hawaii was not a U.S. state at the time. We often call December 7th Pearl Harbor Day because the attack in Hawaii Territory was in Pearl Harbor. So the United States joined World War II on December 8th, the day after what we call Pearl Harbor Day in 1941, and about 2 years, almost to the day, after World War II started, when Germany invaded Poland. Let's look at some examples of U.S. involvement in international conflicts for what we might call undeclared wars, meaning that we call them wars, but they were never declared by Congress. So the Korean War, this was a war where the United States defended South Korea against the communist North Korea seeking to take over South Korea. Similarly, the Vietnam War was fought in that South Vietnam was democratic, North Vietnam was communist, and the communist country of North Vietnam sought to invade and take over South Vietnam, and the United States protected its democratic interests by supporting South Vietnam. The Gulf War, number one, was from 1990 to 1991, fought in the Persian Gulf area with a focus and concern on protecting U.S. oil interests, and Gulf War II similarly focused on protecting the United States against additional terrorism and other concerns that were occurring in the Gulf War as well. Now, several reasons might lead a nation into international conflicts. These might include military conflicts or trade or treaty disagreements. Consequently, we have several reasons for being involved in other international conflicts and issues that never led to war. Let's first look at the Bay of Pigs. The Bay of Pigs invasion focused on the site of an attempted invasion of Cuba by a group opposing Cuban dictator Fidel Castro. The United States led the invasion to try to stop the threat of communism so close to the United States. It is commonly understood that Cuba is 90 miles off the southernmost point in the United States in Key West. And so, consequently, protecting U.S. interests also included focusing on trying to keep Cuba and Cuba's dictator from harming the United States, and one of the outcomes of this concern was an attempted invasion of Cuba by a group opposing Fidel Castro. The next year, we see the Cuban Missile Crisis. With the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviet Union, a communist country, placed missiles in Cuba to threaten the United States because, after all, those missiles would be so close to the United States that an attack could happen immediately after that attack was called, that the missiles wouldn't have to travel so far as they would traveling from Russia or the Soviet Union. President John F. Kennedy threatened military action, and after a 13-day standoff, after 13 days where everybody talked but no one took any other aggressive action, the United States and the Soviet Union reached an agreement to remove the missiles from Cuba. And there have been lots of very interesting books written about the Cuban Missile Crisis. In 1979, Iranian students supporting the Iranian Revolution took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, which is the capital of Iran, holding 66 U.S. diplomats hostage for 444 days. The hostages were eventually freed on January 20th, 1981. Now, President Jimmy Carter was president at the time that the U.S. diplomats were taken hostage, and after Ronald Reagan was elected president, he negotiated the release of the hostages, which then happened on the day of Reagan's inauguration, which was January 20th, 1981. Then we look at concerns about terrorism. We focus especially on September 11, 2001. On September 11, 2001, terrorists hijacked 4 airplanes in the United States, flying them into 3 different U.S.-based locations: New York City, Washington, D.C., and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Over 3,000 Americans died in the attack. The U.S. military and its NATO allies responded by invading Afghanistan, which was the nation that kept the terrorists safe, with the help of allied forces of the Afghani people, meaning that even though the nation of Afghanistan was keeping the terrorists safe, there were Afghani people who wanted peace and wanted an alliance with the United States and with other NATO countries. Together, they removed the terrorist group, the United States and its NATO allies, removed the terrorist group called the Taliban from power in Afghanistan. Thank you for joining me for Middle School Civics Highlights. If you still have questions, we invite you to contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.